All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Top of the morning to you, laddies. This is the Actual Anarchy Podcast St. Patrick's Day special. I've got my friend Robert here, and we are going to talk about the movie The Boondock Saints from an anarcho-capitalist perspective, and we have a special guest who is a quarter Irish, but we will introduce him in just a moment. How are you doing, Robert?
I'm powered by beer in the spirit of the movie and the spirit of the day that this is going to be released on, so enjoy, homies.
Yeah, I too have my Guinness there, laddie. I had a pastrami on rye for lunch. We got some soda bread in the oven. We're good to go. And speaking of good to go, we've got our friend Michael Tabone of the Evolution of Economics.com. He is a bona fide economist of the Austrian variety, so we have some respect for this man. He also contributes to actualanarchy.com, which is our website. So anyone listening, please do check out actualanarchy.com. We've got over 300 articles on there. We just started doing a slight change to it because we were doing an overload. We were throwing out 5-10 articles a day. We're going to scale that back, maybe do 1 or 2, feature some things, make it a little bit less of a in-your-face news site and more of a philosophical, long-standing argument type site. But before we get on to that, why don't we introduce our guest, Michael. How are you, sir?
I'm great, guys. How are you?
We are excellent. Thank you so much for coming on. This is a St. Patrick's Day special, and so when I threw out the invite, you were the first one to respond. You were super excited about it, and you threw in the tidbit that you are a quarter Irish. So we're all set then.
Yeah, my last name is Tabone, but it's O Tabone today, and I'm sitting here with my Guinness as well. So we're all Guinnessed up here on all three of our sides, and hopefully we'll have a good top of the morning show. Have a little fun,
That's perfect. That's perfect. And so we're going to do The Boondock Saints, which is a movie that came out, just before the Y2K events, right? And it starts on, oddly enough, St. Patrick's Day, so it's perfect for us. But I'll just do a real quick overview. Anyone who hasn't seen this movie, stop the show right now, go watch the movie. It's really good. And then come back and you'll get all the ins and outs, especially from an economics angle and what we would view it as in Anarcho-capitalism. But The Boondock Saints, it stars Norman Reedus, who is from The Walking Dead, and so that really threw me because I was watching him all the way through going with this Irish accent, and I kept waiting for Daryl to come out with a crossbow. And he looks super young in this too, which is kind of weird. But they play two brothers, Connor and Murphy McManus, who become vigilantes after doing a self-defense killing of some Russian mafia who are moving in on one of their watering holes, their little bar. The bartender is needing to sell out to these guys, and the Russian mafia comes in and says, "Hey, you got to get out tonight. You're done tonight. Not the end of the month, right now." And they end up getting into a fist fight, brawl with these guys, end up killing them, and the FBI investigates, the Boston PD investigates, realize it's self-defense and let the guy off, but they view it as like an epiphany or like as a kind of an on-high anointment to verify or validify what they were doing. And so then they go out and start wreaking vigilante justice throughout the city, killing more mobsters and drug dealers and pimps and all of these type folks. And that's kind of the whole premise of the movie. Michael, you saw this recently. Do you want to just round out any of this and we'll just start taking it scene by scene?
Sure. these guys are basically the spirit of vengeance or the innate call for fairness that you might have, or anybody might have in their natural life. So when something happens unfairly on a playground, you have a candy bar, someone steals your candy bar, we just all know, even without any social norm training, that that's wrong, that there's some kind of negative rights, there's some kind of natural law that says you just can't go around stealing other people's property, and you can't just go around interfering with other people. And that's kind of where we come into this idea that if we look at the film Boondock Saints from the Anarcho-capitalism concept. So ANCAP, Anarcho-capitalism, the idea that there is only private means, not public means. So there is no public police force, there is no public firefighters, there is no public anything, there is no state in which to give services to the public. Everything is private. How would someone retaliate or get some kind of satisfaction for those kind of injustices? So right in the beginning, these guys are in a bar that the Russian mob comes in and says, we want you guys out. So they come in, they tell the owner of the bar, hey, you got to get out of here. These guys instinctively decide, hey, this is wrong. It's St. Patrick's Day. They do a shot with these guys. They don't really take the shot, the Russians, and they decide that they're going to fight back. They take alcohol, they put it on their butt, they put alcohol on their head, they light it on fire, and they kick the guys out. So they don't kill them. They don't overly react. They just react in proportion to their what was happening to them, and they kick them out. And then the Russians go and find out where these guys live, attack them in their own home, and that's when they retaliate with force. They end up killing these two guys, famously by dropping the toilet on the guy's head, right? In which William Dafoe's character finally shows up, and he makes fun of Detective Greenlee, who's played by Bob Marley, and makes fun of him for having some stupid theory about a huge guy sitting on him. And that's when William Dafoe's character does the awesome job of figuring out what's going on. So we also have this other element where we have the state provided service being completely inept. These guys cannot do their job. But what ends up actually happening is people that are not the private service that is not funded by the state. In other words, these two brothers, Connor McManus and Murphy McManus, these guys end up being this call to vengeance or justice that's outside of the law. These private citizens figure it out that they're going to be the ones that go around, dispensing justice in the name of the spirit, and they go to the church and they get all the blessings, and that's how we go from there. That's the beginning of the whole idea.
Okay, I got one question just from what you said. Now it seems to be full disclosure, I haven't seen this movie in like 15 years, so I probably saw it on like home video from a Blockbuster video, a couple of years after it came out.
On
based
VHS.
on what maybe DVD. I'm not, but it could have been. So they kind of see it as like this kind of holy, divine kind of inspiration to do this. Is there ever a time, or is it in the beginning of the time, that they are going to get paid for their efforts, or do they anticipate taking their payment from the ill-gotten gains of these gangsters?
So it's not until they get involved, they start their exploits of going around and being this instrument of justice after they leave the police precinct, in which the police, basically William Dafoe, says, let these guys go. They were just acting in self-defense. These guys are okay. They let these guys go, and these guys go into the world, and they decide, you know what, we're going to take out one or two more of these people. They end up taking the firearms and the watches and the drugs that they had from the Russians who they had killed, and they bring it to this underground arms dealer, another guy working outside of the state, and they decide to buy a whole bunch of things. And famously, they bought the rope and the guns and everything else, which they use in a second movement where they go after the big-time Russian mob guys. They have these guys in the information. They go after the big guys, the big Russian mob guys, the leader and the underbosses, and they end up falling through the ceiling, and the rope catches them just perfectly, and somehow these guys are able to do things that no sniper team in the entire world could be trained to do. They're perfect headshots and everything else, and they end up killing everybody, and they find a huge briefcase full of cash. When they find the briefcase full of cash, they go back to their apartment. They grab their buddy Rocco, who actually works again for another syndicate, the mob syndicate, the Italian syndicate. Again, not a state-funded thing, a private mob type thing. And they're talking, and the guy goes, "You can make a lot of money." And they go, "You know what? We could do that. We can make a lot of money if we went into business together." So they're very entrepreneurial, again, outside of the state bounds.
But they're not necessarily acting on the behalf of any specific individual that's been harmed by these groups, right? They're just saying these are bad guys, or are they? They're not. They're acting on their own behalf, right? They're not acting on necessarily any harmed client's behalf.
Yeah, they never in the movie. They never go into in the first part of the movie. They never actually go into business for other people. When they end the movie, however, we're not really sure whether they actually ever did receive money for their services or not, right? Because at the end of the movie, they end up going into a courtroom and killing the head of the mob, right? So there had to be some. We don't really know that. That's part of the world that we're left to speculate. But we are left
until part 2 came out.
I deny the fact that part 2 even exists. I'm not willing to say that it exists.
It is better that way. So yeah, we'll just pretend it doesn't exist, and yes, it's sort of left open-ended at the end, though they do sort of form this alliance with the main machine type killer at the end, and go into business working together with him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's clear, right?
Killer. What's the machine killer?
El Duce, played by Billy Connolly, who, by the way, Billy Connolly is awesome. Great comedian, been around forever, awesome guy. If we're talking about the Irish and the awesomeness, El Duce is, and again, another perfect example of how corrupt the state is used in the movie. He is kept in a very maximum security prison, and it is by completely corrupt means that the mob lets him out of that maximum security facility. They need him. They make a phone call with some money. Boom. This guy is left out of a maximum security prison that he's been locked up in for 30 years, all because the corrupt mob was able to influence that public institution. So again, it's another example of a public institution being used for corrupt purposes.
Right, and it's at the drop of a hat, like you were saying, and prior to that, I mean, they're treating this guy like Hannibal Lecter. Like, they put special security cages around him when he's in the parole meeting. They wheel him out. He's all strapped down. I mean, he's a dangerous dude. And, yeah, it just took one phone call, basically, and they got him out.
Yep, absolutely.
And why is the government so easily corruptible? Because they don't have any worries about any kind of competition. They don't have to actually provide a good service. So it's not like if you let out some horrific killer, they're all of a sudden out of a job. They're pretty much guaranteed a position, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's a lot of these kind of things that pop up in the movie that are really interesting, Like you were just saying, I mean, I think that the police do the same thing. They're inept because basically, who are you going to go to? Right?
Right.
Who else, you have Detective Greenlee coming up with these stupid theories left and right, but who else are you going to who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? There's no one else to call here, You're just dealing with the police, and they're completely inept in the way the movie is depicted, I should say.
Mm-hmm. And it's not Anarcho-capitalism, so the Boondock Saints don't have a telephone listing.
No. No, they don't.
And no one's going to call them just yet. But thank you for foreshadowing that we will be doing a Ghostbusters episode in the near future, Michael.
Oh, really? Wow, that'd be cool. I'll definitely listen to that one. Absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's coming up next couple of weeks. That one it's going to be a compare and contrast from the original to the new feminazi version.
Oh, that's got to be great. That's cool. That's a good one.
So yeah, let's get back to there's this corrupt government. State locks the guy up. They let him out. The state doesn't offer any alternatives, so it's the absence of alternatives that creates this monopoly and hence poor service. You're paying for it whether you want to or not. There was another note that you had made to me about when we were talking about let's discuss this film, and that was that the boys value lifestyle over money.
Yes, they do. So right in the beginning of the movie, you realize that these guys are smarter than their circumstances would let on. So right at the beginning of the movie, these guys dress in wife beaters with simple, navy coats on with jeans, and they work in a meat packing factory, and they're just kind of, very simple. They seem like very simple people until you realize that when they're talking, they understand about culture, they understand about different languages. You learn later on that their mother insisted that they learn several different languages and cultures outside of the regular school system. So again, they were homeschooled outside of the public school system to be more educated and intelligent than what the public school system allowed. And they decided that they weren't necessarily going to utilize all of that type of, that ability that they had, because they must have clearly liked the lifestyle that they lived over what they could have possibly possessed. So they ordinarily had so they had a list of 1 to 10 or whatever it is, and they like to pick their lifestyle over utilizing their intelligence or their ability. And that's why they live in that squalor type of place where they live with beds that are just simply, there's no box springs or anything. They just live on the floor. Their shower's right there next to them. They live right there next to their toilet. They must have liked that lifestyle much more than utilizing what the innate abilities and the things that they learned from their parents, mostly from their mother, right? Their dad was locked up in a prison cell. Spoiler alert. And they had a preference one way or the other. Normally in cinema, someone's smart and they live a certain way, and in this particular case, they're like Tyler Durdens. They wanted to live simply, minimalistically, and they wanted to have a job packing meat, which they clearly could have had a job being a million other things.
This reminds me of Good Will Hunting, where Will Hunting was a super genius, but he liked to do his construction jobs with his buddies because that's what he liked to do.
Yeah, another Boston film we could have done, huh?
Next year, brother.
I don't know if there's as much violence in that movie, but yeah, we could probably do
it. Well, they do fight. They do fight in the, he just stops the car and fights that guy in the middle of the basketball court. So you got that going on for you. And you got next year. You could always do it next year. You don't have to do it all at once,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is that scene. There's a couple fight scenes, and then there's the child abuse, and there's a couple issues in there.
Yeah.
It's Boston beans. Can't go wrong.
So you bring up some really good points because, clearly these guys have a very wide and large skill set, and they are making a choice to, live the way that they were living. I think during the investigation of the initial crime scene, they make note that the building where the water was dripping down doesn't have a supervisor. Like, it's a squatter's building. It's supposed to be uninhabited, but that's where the boys are living. So they're not even paying rent, right? They're living in this, like you said, this just open, run-down, loft-style building that has their toilet right next to their bed.
That's absolutely right. And that's what, if we learn anything from my Austrian background, right, is the fact that people like Murray Rothbard would have written in Man, Economy, and State about how going on with this ordinal preference, that it's all subjective, that you can't say from person to person that, hey, if I lived in that same exact situation, if I was multilingual and I had all these skill sets that these guys had, would I pick the same exact thing that they did? And I might not. I might pick something completely different. From brother to brother, they might have a different preference one way or the other, but they decided after it's all said and done, that this is the way that they want to live. And it's definitely a different take on, just the simple guy, the simple bum who wants to live by himself, and they're making a choice as brothers. So there's another cool little dynamic that exists there, and it's just it's an interesting thing to think about how subjectivity plays a huge role into how these guys are going to live their life, and that Hollywood decided to choose this particular avenue to go down. It's really kind of cool.
Yeah, I dig it. Now, I don't think that the writer of this movie is necessarily an Austrian economist of any stretch, but it is interesting that this is how he laid out his story to be able to exhibit this kind of subjective valuation that you're speaking of. So it is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, like I said before, and like I brought up to Dan, I think there's a lot of Anarcho-capitalism moments that are in this movie that you might not think about when you first watch it right off the bat. Let's just take and I'd love to get everyone's perspective on this about vengeance itself. I mean, is vengeance really from our understanding of anarchy and our understanding of the ability for someone to have retaliative is retaliation self-defense? Is retaliation in an automatic violent way without some kind of societal norm, is that okay? What's the line of vengeance? If I get cut off tomorrow, can I just by Dan cuts me off tomorrow in traffic, can I just call the vengeance guys and say, hey, vengeance guys, guy cut me off. You got to go to his house and you got to kill him, and you got to say a prayer and shoot him in the eyes and stuff. Where's the line? How does it work? What do you guys think?
That sounds a little bit too premeditated, man.
It's all those damn posts, Dan. No, I'm just kidding. But no, what do you guys think? Where's the line?
Yeah, this is something that Robert and I talk about all the time. Because, and I'll summarize Robert's position, and he can summarize mine. But Robert generally says if somebody transgresses upon another, it's no longer self-defense after the fact. And so really you can't then initiate force against even if you know it was the perpetrator. And so the tool of choice is ostracism, or making it known that they are a shady bad person who's done X, so that other people won't want to associate with them. So ostracism being the tool. Is that a pretty good summary of your stance on that kind of thing, Robert?
Well, that's my personal stance on it. Of course, everything we're talking about is our own personal stances, and we're not going to force anybody else to accept our sense of justice or whatever. For you, I've tried to get this out of you multiple times, and I think we both agree that the market is going to serve justice far better than any monopoly ever could, because there's an incentive to do so. So the market would arrive at some sort of best solution for most people, or there would be multiple solutions to choose from. Say one provider, does business in a certain way, and you prefer that way, so you'll tend to use that service more than another provider that would do justice in a different way. So the best one would win out. I'm kind of interested in the exact mechanism by which justice is, justified. I've heard you speak about, Daniel, before, that when someone aggresses against you, they are creating a contract, and that the contract isn't over until both parties are satisfied, and that's what allows you to exact, justice on that person. So in that sense, and if that's not the case, correct me, but if that's the case, then what would you feel if there's this vigilante group who, let's say you were wronged by the mob, and some vigilante group comes along and murders these guys without your involvement at all? They just saw that this thing was done and a wrong was committed, and they went in on your behalf. They didn't consult you at all, but they just took it upon themselves to go right the wrong and end up killing the person. How would you feel about that? Do you think that would violate your contract? Or am I totally off base with the whole contract talk?
I hardly recall this whole contract thing to begin with. I think I was saying that if somebody initiates violence against you or starts the fight, they don't get to pick how it ends. And so in that way, they sort of entering into an implicit agreement with you, like, hey, we're going to fight about this, and they expect to overpower you, otherwise they wouldn't attack you, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not really up to them how it gets finished. In a current climate, like the current non-Anarcho-capitalism version, you can only respond to the point where you stop the threat from happening. So that's how far you can take the self-defense. Like in our last episode, we were talking about that pharmacy that got robbed, and the guy shot back at the perpetrators and stopped their ability to continue to cause harm. But then he went one step further and shot the guys on the ground, killing them. And that was the bridge too far, where they were no longer able to aggress against him, but then he exacted his vengeance on the spot. And this is an interesting conversation to have, because in Anarcho-capitalism, like Michael was saying, it's kind of, it might be sort of in play, like as fair game.
Well, with that rationale, though, there wouldn't be a death penalty in Anarcho-capitalism, right? Because you would stop the attack, and you would have this person in custody or whatever. You'd have him not attacking you anymore. So you couldn't then aggress against him. Or could you not even imprison them? Because then that would be further aggression, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question as well. And maybe, Michael, you have some input in this right after I say this part, is when you're in a situation of self-defense with lethal force, you're trying to stop them, and the best way to stop them is, center mass. So you're shooting to, shut them down, right? So you're not shooting to, I'm just going to wing him, I'm just going to hit him in the leg, and then maybe he'll stop. No, you're going center mass to end the encounter as quickly as possible. So there is a high likelihood of them dying. So it's not to say that, there wouldn't be self-defense deaths. There would be. I don't know if that's the equivalent of a justice system, but...
Well, how could it be, though? If the violence, the initiation of violence is ended, then how could, like, say someone came and murdered somebody you love, whatever, in an ANCAP society, how could you gain justice for that? I mean, in my world, I would want to ostracize myself. I'd want to let everybody know that this person's a murderer. But for people who that's not good enough, who even though this person all of a sudden can't get work, he doesn't have any friends because everybody doesn't want to associate with a murderer, blah, blah, blah. It's a terrible situation, which would create massive incentive for people not to murder anybody. In your world, where that's not good enough, how could you then aggress against him to imprison him, or force him to like some sort of a negotiating table? I mean, what in your world is the solution? What would you be satisfied with if some friend of yours or some loved one of yours was murdered by somebody?
If I could just step in here for a second and take over the question, if it's all right. So I've been a martial artist since I was 10, so for about 24 years, and you constantly are taught about how you have to meet force with force, right? So you have to meet force with the same amount of force that that gets exhibited onto you. So some guy pushes you. Do you have to get into an altercation where you end their life? No. If you can escape if you can escape the fight, you should, right? Shouldn't enter into a situation which you have to utilize your abilities. So, if someone cuts me off in traffic, do I get to sue them? No, unless there's damage done to my property or myself. But when does self-defense become an issue where you're no longer self-defense? It's now a attack. And, let's say someone goes to punch me in the face, and I put them down on the ground, and they get back up. And they go to punch me again. Well, did I neutralize the threat? I neutralized one threat, but I didn't necessarily neutralize the threat from coming at me again. So if someone were to come into my house and shoot one of my family members, and I looked right at them in the face and said, "Are you done?" And let's say they say, "No, I'm not done. I'm going to shoot this guy next." Yeah. But when is it self-defense? You're all within that moment. you're not. Everything is self-defense, I believe, until that threat is neutralized. The threat is neutralized. Everything is in a neutral position. So when someone comes to your house and kills your dog and is looking at you the entire time they're killing your dog, and he leaves, is the threat neutralized? I don't think so, because he's doing it in a threatening manner in which there might be more danger coming down the pike, right? It might be coming down later. So I don't think simply ostracizing him tells you that you're safer. I think that there needs to be some kind of other step-in process that deals with that situation, because the threat is not neutralized. Does that mean that I have to go after that guy and kill him? That's where the interesting conversation comes in. That's where it gets kind of blurry. Is there a state system set up, or not a state system, but is there a system set up within Afghanistan, in Anarcho-capitalism that deals with people that step out of line? It might be different in every single society and every single societal norms. Like, if we're talking about the Herman Hoppe concept, Hoppe, depending on how you pronounce it, concept that everybody's going to live in enclaves with social norms that we all agree upon before moving there or living there, and if you want to not live by those social norms, you move out of that enclave into another enclave. They might have different ways of dealing with each individual circumstance, but for me personally, I don't think that if someone came into my house and did a unspeakable act to a family member of mine, if I would be okay with just simply not allowing them to do business in certain businesses. I think that I would definitely be of the mindset that this person needs to be made an example of, one, but two, needs retaliatory, the same exact level of retaliation needs to be brought upon them that happened to me. And if that happens to be that, I know that capital punishment is a Ron Paul would vote against capital punishment, right? And I agree with that. But we're talking right now in a self-defense aspect. He's not a danger to society at large. This person's a danger to you, right? And I think that's a big difference.
Okay, so he comes in and he kills your wife or whatever. Are you saying that you would need his wife to die, or he would need to die in order for you to feel that justice has been served, or the threat has been neutralized?
If a guy comes into my house and something happens, I feel like I need him, not his wife. His wife is a completely separate entity than himself. I don't feel that that's right to go after innocent people that have committed no issues, right? I mean,
you said, I hate to quibble with what your words are, but you said that the exact same thing needs to happen to him that happened to you.
Yeah, but I agree. Maybe my miswording was bad wording there. But my point is that retaliatory justice needs to happen to that person, all right? Not. Okay. Yeah, obviously, if that person did something unspeakable to one of my children, which I don't have any children, but if they ever did, I don't feel like their children are an equal, an eye for an eye, equal opportunity employer here. I don't feel like that at all. I feel, like they did something should happen to them. I don't know what that statute of limitations is. What is that? How far away are we talking about? If I let 6 years go by and then I decide, I'm not okay with this, is that okay? I don't know. This is the gray area. I think is the good conversation that we need to have as anarcho-capitalists and as people that think along these lines. I think that there's not enough of this kind of conversation, and I think that we all just kind of say, oh, I'm going to go to some arbitrator. I don't know. You should put yourself into certain situations. I don't know if you're going to be okay with an arbitrator. If somebody came in and did something bad to your kids, are you going to be okay with just sitting in court and arbitrating in court across from a guy who did something extremely dangerous with your child? I mean, we've seen a lot of cases in the past where we have court systems and people can't handle it, and they end up, shooting the guy on the way to the courtroom. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things here. A lot of, areas that need to be covered.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because, if we do compare it to the current system, there is no real recompense for victims, right? It's always they're paying for their crimes to society by going to prison or whatever. There's no making the victim whole in some fashion, right? Like all the restitution goes to the state.
Right. In this movie,
that system's no good.
Well, and if you watch in Boondock Saints, to bring it back to Boondock Saints for a second, if you watch the end of the movie, the closing credits are all about how people in society kind of side with the Boondock Saints. They side with these two brothers because these brothers are doing what the police, in their view, cannot do, or what the state justice department cannot do, which is provide a level of retaliation or a level of justice that is outside of what the normal state-provided service can do. Now, whether we think that's right or wrong, I think it plays back into that innate sense of justice that you have on that playground where you say, hey, it's wrong to steal this candy bar. Hey, it's wrong to kill these people. Hey, it's wrong to extort money from a bar or a place of business. And that where you're going to go, right, you're going to go to the two brothers because these guys or whatever, vehicle or firm would provide this service, because they're going to provide a level of justice that the societal norm might be in this particular society in Boston. If we were to I know it's hard to believe that if we're going to talk about Massachusetts and Boston without laws. So yeah, this is very, very hard because these guys tax like nobody's business. So it's very, just a lot of disbelief here. But let's just assume that these guys lived in Afghanistan, and Kapistan, and there was no law. And you went to these two brothers. I think the norm in that, at least at that time period, at least what's in that movie, these guys, the societal norm would be like, yeah, let these guys do what they want to do. Let them take care of business.
Right. But what if in the situation where they step out of bounds, and somebody else calls, they let's say they kill somebody for selling drugs, which in Kapistan would be a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But they have some sort of moral compunction, whether handed down to them by their god or what have you. I guess they would suffer market consequences, but I guess would they? No, I'm still thinking about it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's what we're here. That's what we're here to do. I don't think anybody. I'm trying to think about all the literature and everything I've read. Usually what people do is they usually say something, when I went to Mises University and I sat there with Bob Murphy and he talked about the stateless society and what the things would be, going to the moon or NASA traveling or all this kind of stuff. We talk in a very, very large generalities, and I think that a lot of times we don't really put the scientific method necessarily of skepticism to what we're saying. And I'm not saying that we're wrong. What I'm saying is that these gray areas are what we need to discuss. And I don't think that anybody really has this thing, locked down. And if we did, I think that we would have, not saying we have more compelling evidence or more compelling arguments, but we're dealing with that. We've all three of us were born into the society where we were taught that, you need the state, you need the government, you need this. We somehow had our come to Jesus moment where we said, you know what, we don't. And it's not, we don't have all the answers because this is to some degree territory which is not necessarily laid out before us. We don't have a road. We're going in not just us, but a lot of other people, we're all going in a territory with machetes and we're knocking down, huge forests here. So I don't think there's a problem with just talking the idea through.
Thank you for bringing up my roads, because that's another argument against our position. But I don't want to go down that road because I think it's thoroughly debunked by Walter Block and many others.
Absolutely.
But, I think this is interesting because when you were talking about, the same level of justice being, exacted upon the person who perpetrated against you, that brought into a new light the whole Hatfield and McCoy's thing, because that's often brought up against the idea or concept of Anarcho-capitalism, because what prevents the Hatfield and McCoy situation from happening where, you're killing this person and then they react by killing a person on your end, and then before you know it, the whole world's blind, right, to mix metaphors. But I do think that there would be mechanisms in place, or maybe even the stuff Molyneux, DRO and the reputation system that would play a role in whether people are able to, interact with each other in commerce or in association. People would have reputations, they'd have dispute resolution organizations, they'd have insurance. It would be like having insurance, right? And it would sort of almost be compulsive in a way, like this is one of my initial resistances to fully going ANCAP was when my friend was telling me about the DRO stuff. And I was like, and the reputation system, because I was like, then I have to participate in this system, right? If I don't participate in it, then I can't buy anything. I can't eat at a restaurant. I can't stay at a hotel. So I am, in a way, compelled to participate. And I don't know if I've lost you guys already.
No, I'm with you. I understand. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But then, as I've matured a bit, and I hope that I have a little at least, I feel like that's almost the same argument that like a Venus Project guy would make against nature. I'm forced to use my labor to interact with my environment to satisfy my wants. I'm forced to work. I'm forced to exert effort. And I think it's not totally super equivalent, but it's kind of like each other in my mind now. That's sort of how I've come to terms with it's to my advantage to have the DRO insurance. It's to my advantage to improve my reputation score, similar to my credit score or the Sesame score in China, right? You've heard about this, Michael?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah, and of course that thing is a state-sponsored abomination that's enforcing patriotism to communism. So of course it's evil, but I think in Ancapistan there would be something similar in place, sort of like a reputation system essentially, and that would get us away sort of from the Hatfield-McCoy situation. It would reduce violence significantly, and it would be a drastic improvement over the current criminal justice system that is in place today.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about the crimes of organized crime in the world today. I mean, they almost entirely exist in government-created black markets with gambling, prostitution, drugs, guns. They do some immoral things where they kill and whatnot, but they're not allowed to, use like the court systems if they have an internal dispute. So I think a lot of the violence that you get from the mafia, which is essentially government created, I mean, with prohibition and other things like that, and the war on drugs and that sort of thing, which artificially reduces the supply and creates the huge profit margins at high risk. But a lot of these things wouldn't exist in Ancapistan, so there wouldn't be this incentive to violence.
Right, and then you speak of organized crime, and the government is the biggest organized crime, of course. So there's a distinction in the private level of organized crime that is a result of government prohibitions and regulations and rules and laws, but then the government itself is even worse. But public crime it dwarfs private crime by many folds. I don't know. Those are impossible numbers to come up with, but absolutely. Yeah, I did hear that civil asset forfeiture is actually a greater amount per year, like in billions of dollars, than reported theft.
Absolutely.
And that's just what's reported. And that's right.
But, you get something stolen from you, you file a police report, what's the value of this? They add all that up over the course of a year, and then they add up all the civil asset forfeiture that the police just take from you. And it's actually the police take more than the criminals, than the private criminals do.
And that's just in that one area, not to mention taxation and all the other things, all the regulations that prevent businesses and
all that just sort of stifling business and opportunity. It's criminal.
We almost had somebody become president recently. That would have been a perfect example of government corruption. But anyway, the what do you call it? You want to talk about ostracization? We did already see that kind of in the past, right? When you were part of the Catholic Church and you were ostracized and you were discommunicated.
Excommunicated, yeah.
Excommunicated, my fault. I apologize. I haven't been a Catholic in a long time. When you've been excommunicated from the church, it wasn't like it is today. Like, if you're excommunicated from the church today, you still have a life. But we're talking back then, if you were excommunicated from the church, it meant your entire society was against you. Everything that was around you didn't do business with you. Didn't interact with you. So we already have historical precedent to look at, right? If we wanted to examine what would happen to somebody if they were excommunicated from society in smaller enclaves, right? We already have that kind of that precedent. So I think that's interesting, something to look at, something to definitely look into.
Yeah, I like the idea of the Hoppa enclaves, because then you would sort of have a choice in, hey, I'm willing to live by this set of conduct, and someone else may choose something else, and so they'll go migrate towards those areas, right? And it's not even a state. It's just like-minded or similarly minded people deciding that, hey, I want to have this kind of rule of conduct, and I want to have this other kind. So they'll naturally move to those areas. And I think this is where he talks about the physical removal if somebody is in that area that doesn't ascribe to those norms of that area, right?
Correct, and that's I have two contention. I have a huge contention with the the HHH groups and people that are they just take that one quote of Hoppe's and they run with it. It drives me absolutely insane. Please read his entire book. Read all of his books. I hate that. I hate when people just pull that one paragraph out of that thing and they go, "See, you can just physically remove people," and they make memes out of this, dropping people out of helicopters. His whole point is exactly what you just said, right? There's a lot more to the concept than just dropping people out of the thing. You'd have to be part of it. You'd have to, decide that you were going to live by the Anarcho-capitalism rule of that enclave. And if you'd started acting outside of what an ANCAP is, then you'd have, if you don't decide to leave and go to some other place, then they would have to physically remove you, but not just, arbitrarily, Dan decides one day that he's going to live by certain rules, so he buys a helicopter. That's not the point of the meme,
Right, and this plays well into the whole ANCAP situation, where an ANCAP is perfectly fine with there being communes. Hey, if you fools who don't understand economics want to all band together and live by each, take from each, whatever, do it. But leave us alone. But they can't return the favor. Like, if they have communism, it has to be everywhere. Otherwise, it's not, quote-unquote, fair. And it still wouldn't work. In fact, it would work even worse. It would just be amplified. But anyway, I know, Robert, you wanted to jump in, and I cut you off there, so I hope we didn't detract too far if we want to go back to your point.
Yeah, I completely lost my train of thought on that, but that's okay. I did want to mention, I forget if we were having a conversation with an ANCAP recently, or there's been some articles posted online about seasteading, and there was a person that was really pushing towards that idea where, out in this, unowned, essentially unclaimed land in the ocean, it doesn't belong to any specific country, and I belong in quotation marks, we can essentially set these enclaves up. Do you remember what I'm talking about, Daniel?
I'm familiar with the seasteading concept, but I don't know if I recall us speaking with anyone on the show specifically about it. But it does, with you speaking about it, it makes me think, what legitimate claim does a government have over the 90% of the unused land in the West in the United States, right? And it makes me wonder if, the Clive and Bundy, that whole situation with the Department of Natural Resources or whoever, what claim do they have on that property? So perhaps they were, quote-unquote, seasteading or homesteading that area because it's not legitimately owned by the government. They use it. They've been using it for years. I don't know the full details of the situation, but I think I recall that they had been using it for a long time, and then the government was now trying to tell them they couldn't.
Was that the Oregon situation where they were burning, and then they were told that they couldn't burn? Or is that something? Am I getting confused?
That sounds like it might be part of it. Like the burning they were doing was actually beneficial, like it was preventing potential harm, later. But
you preemptive burn so that you don't get a giant forest fire that wipes everything out, and then they came in and fined them for burning down public land.
Yeah, basically, I think the general idea is that you create like a perimeter, right, of barren land, and that barren that becomes becomes an area which, if there ever is a fire, it doesn't spread past that little area that you've already cleared out. I mean, I think that's the general understanding, and I think that's what part of what they were doing down there. And I think you are right. Did they homestead it though? I'm assuming you both are familiar with the Lockean proviso and Locke's concept of what homesteading is.
Yeah, give us the breakdown real quick, just so that our listeners who might not be as in tune with us as we are. No. Yeah, go ahead and go through it. Sorry, listeners. I don't mean to talk down to you guys.
Well, I don't know. Everyone has a different level of coming in on this thing, so I'll try to summarize it real quick. Right? John Locke, introduced this idea of homesteading, which is you have to mix your labor with the land, and that basically allows you to say that you have some kind of ownership over it. So, you walk into a field, no one's been there forever, and there's an apple tree, and there's pine trees, and there's other kind of trees there, and you clear out some of the land, so you start working with it. You pick some of the apples from the apple tree, and you create a home, and you live around that area, and that certain area where you've mixed your labor with the land is what we call homesteading. The Lockean proviso on that is that you have to leave it in good or better condition for the future use, right? So if I have that land and I decide that I'm going to take AA batteries and bury them all over the land, so I poison it, so I can kill the property for future owners, I'm not keeping it in as good or better shape. So that's the proviso, and that has some contention to it, depending on who you're talking to in the libertarian world or the Anarcho-capitalism world or the world like that. But that proviso, I think, is a good parameter of, do I have the ability to ruin this property for others that it exists for after I die, right? So I think that's the point, right? If I have a magical golden ring and I say the next person that wears it dies, did I homestead that ring, right? So, if I poison the land around me, is it really homesteaded? That's an interesting gray area too, but depending on who you're talking to. But that's basically homesteading in a nutshell. Did the government homestead an area of land which they came to acquire through means that might not necessarily have been just or prompt, right? So the Louisiana Purchase was a purchase done by our boy Jefferson. Was it just? That's all a matter of debate. But it was a trade that was a contractual trade that was done. Was there other trades that happened in the Midwest that were necessarily just trades, or were they stolen? Was it stolen land? That's where it becomes interesting, right? If it's stolen land, is it good? Is it okay to then call it homesteaded by the government?
Yeah, for me, government just seems to claim land. I mean, yes, the Louisiana Purchase was a purchase of a bunch of land from France, but did France necessarily own that land? I mean, yes, they explored that land, but you wouldn't say that France, homesteaded all that land, nor would you say that the United States government homesteaded the entire United States.
I agree with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm just trying to set up the argument, but yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's like fencing stolen goods, right? Like, is it a legitimate trade at that point? Plus, they're all using stolen money. They're illegitimate entities to begin with that are just groups of individuals, so they can't really own thing in a collective fashion anyway, right?
Which is why I think the Anarcho-capitalism model works better, because if I'm one individual and I come across 20,000 acres of land, can I legitimately, by myself, without any capital investment, can I legitimately homestead 20,000 acres of land? Probably not, right? I probably am limited to 10 to 20 to 30 acres of land, 40 acres of land at most, unless I start acquiring capital goods and I start, you know what I mean? There's no way that I could say, see everything that's here and the things I can't see that I haven't touched yet. Yeah, I homesteaded that, so don't step on my land. I don't think it's possible. I think that you automatically are limited by what you can actually touch, feel, and create, right? So I think if we went back in those days and we actually had Anarcho-capitalism, I think you'd see more of that.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Let's wind this back to the movie a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, Michael, are you familiar with the justice system that's in place in, say, the Diamond District of New York? I don't know if it was Rothbard or someone else who said that I don't know if it's the Hasidic Jews who are the major players there, but there's a whole arbitration system that's fully private that operates outside of our normal, U.S. government style level of justice. And I'm wondering if you have familiarity with it, and if so, can you speak to it at all?
I'm not familiar with that necessarily, but I am Italian. Sicilian, as a matter of fact. But so I'm slightly familiar with those kind of things. I'm also very familiar with the what they call the Chinese banking system, or if you're Korean, it's the Korean banking system, or if you're Japanese, it's the Japanese banking system, which operates underground, completely outside of the grid of normal society. And I'm assuming, from what you're about to explain to me about the Diamond District's inner workings, that it kind of works similarly. But
yeah, well, I pretty much blew my load on what I knew about it. I just recall that somebody made mention of it being an example of a justice system outside of a government entity, and it works very, very well. I think it was using examples maybe by Rothbard or maybe by like an Ed Stringham, because he always talks about private security versus public, and other arbitration systems that tend to work as examples in society. And so maybe that's something that we can explore a little bit further in future shows, and find some articles to reference down below in the show notes for this page, because I think it is an interesting concept to look at examples of where systems are in place that function very well that aren't part of the government-mandated system.
Well, think about how people utilize so first off, it's a cultural thing that exists within a culture, so a social norm and an enclave, right? Just like if we were talking about the Sicilian Mafia way back in the day, we're talking about a small societal thing, which, doesn't just exist in Sicily, but a small societal thing that's like an enclave, that's a social norm that everyone accepts to be part of the normal everyday process. And when there isn't things to sell, like drugs and all those kind of things, and there's a specific markets that these guys exist in, right? And they do provide a service, and they might utilize intimidation practices and all those kind of things, and extortion and theft, in other words, to get their base income. By the way, which is no different than what we're saying that this taxation and theft, what the government would do, to extort your business. The government says, I need 40% of your income, and the mafia might say, hey, we only want 10%, but if there's ever a problem, come see us. Well, if the particular mafia in a Sicilian society was to say, screw you guys, we're not going to help you at all, they would lose favor with the entire society, and they would get kicked out of their own power, and they know that, right? So you can only piss off very small groups. You can't piss off everybody. And I'm assuming within the diamond world, one of your coercive abilities is the fact that each diamond is worth a lot of money, right? And that diamonds themselves are a fantastic store of the ability of their, and I mean store of value, not in the Keynesian sense. I mean a store of value in the sense that it's money that it's very hard to destroy. It's money that can withstand the test of time. I don't mean value as in value, theory of value, labor theory of value kind of stuff.
I made that diamond with my bare hands.
Yes, you're like Superman. You crush the coal together. So diamonds are very well known to be a great source of untraceable wealth from different families all over the place forever, because there's no markings on it, there's no social security number on it, there's none of that stuff. You just have that diamond from X, Y, and Z place, and you're able to put it through, and you have diamonds forever over here, and it's easy to sell, and there's no real way to say that diamond came from this exact place, right? So it's very easy to launder money through diamonds and different gemstones, especially diamonds. De Beers, by the way, artificially produces the value of diamonds by, stockpiling a whole bunch, and releasing only a few diamonds compared to their supply per year. So De Beers is the worst monopoly of all time in the diamond world.
And
but I'm assuming because
solely powered by government, right? Like any monopoly to exist needs to be supported by government, otherwise it would lose its ability to be a monopoly, right?
Absolutely. And matter of fact, there's a really cool show out. It just ended called Taboo. It's on FXX, and I really recommend everybody watch it. Tom Hardy is the major actor in the show, I should say. There's 8 episodes. It's only done 1 season, and the entire thing is about different taboo subjects, and one of them happens to be monopoly. So in the story, he ends up having to fight with the Americans and the British government over a little piece of land over in Vancouver area, and it actually is a trade route between China and America and Canada, and he wants the monopoly on all trade of tea from China to the American continent, which this happens, by the way, in the early 1800s, so we're talking about the birth of the American continent, right? So he wants the monopoly trade, and he's willing to sell it to either that little coast of that little area. He's willing to sell to either the Americans or the British, and he wants to get it sold. So it's the show is awesome because it points out that monopoly only exists because the government will force monopoly to exist. Competition will automatically destroy it. And back to Boondock Saints, we're talking about 2 brothers that would be giving us one vigilante group that we can go to for justice, but there might be 20 others, right? So if these brothers do something that's outside of the norm, right, you just go to the other vigilante group and say, hey, these guys are out there going nuts. You got to stop them. You got to end those 2 guys because they're off popping out people that they shouldn't be popping off, right? And I think that's the way that you would handle it, is you would have competing firms keeping each other in check.
Yeah, so
right.
you
can also remove your business from the ones you don't support, you don't agree with, even if they're not necessarily going too far outside of the social norms that they ought to be aggressed against or murdered or whatever. But yeah, if you don't agree with their practices or whatever, you could support somebody who you do. What were you going to say, Dan?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if this, not to take it too far away from the Boondock Saints again, but this Tom Hardy show you were talking about, I actually used to live on an island that used to be divided between the United States and the British. And there's actually 2 old military bases on it that are now national parks. And Robert came out to visit me once, and we hiked around what was the British camp, but on the south end of the island was the American camp, and it was where the pig war happened. And I'm wondering if that's related to this Tom Hardy thing, because there was dispute over this particular island being owned by the British and hence Canada or the United States.
Was it a ex-Indian territory?
Well, it was all populated by indigenous peoples, for hundreds of years. But I don't know if it was ever considered like a reservation or anything like that.
Well, in the movie, his mother is actually from North America, and she's a Native American, and she's from, to be honest with you, I forgot what tribe she's from. But her people are from a particular island that sits around in between the Canadian border and the American border. But that little area that is right there was from the Nooka tribe, I believe it's called, or it was called the Nooka territory. And so it might be based on something that actually existed in real life. It might very well be. Based on a concept, there was a piece of land like that. But it is a very interesting concept, right? That he knows that monopoly exists because government of intervention. He knows he's got to go to one of the 2 countries, and he's English himself. But he knows he's got to play each country against each other to get the best deal. He knows that. It's pretty cool. very cool story.
And just this one episode focuses on the monopoly?
Oh no! All 8 episodes focus on the monopoly. That's the whole point of the show. Well, that's the whole point of the show is how he can take advantage of his newly inherited property. It's really cool. It's a really cool movie. TV show, I should say. I keep saying movie, but because Tom Hardy for me is a movie guy. But and the best part about that whole show is Ridley Scott's involved. There's a whole bunch of A-list actors that are not A-list, but there's a whole bunch of I guess they're A-list. A whole bunch of different actors that are on that thing, and just an awesome show. And Tom Hardy's one of the showrunners, so he's keeping it very interesting, and it's definitely not Hollywood. And there's a bunch of moments that you wouldn't expect that pop up constantly. It's just very well written, big surprises, and it's very cool, and it's a lot different than you would normally expect from TV. Just like Boondock Saints. I mean, I didn't expect a movie to really deal with. There's movies like The Punisher, which kind of deals with vengeance in a similar concept, right? You have a vigilante running around out there that, he's dispensing justice again for his. It starts off with his own self, right? He's getting vengeance for his death of his own family, but then he starts helping out people around him, his neighbors and everything else, and at the end of the movie, you're kind of left with this idea that the Punisher is out there to take really the bad guys out. You know what I mean? And sure. his neighbors, they accept him. They social norms again accept that level of vengeance. So again, that kind of brings us back to my point that I think that there's an innate sense of retaliation or innate sense of fairness that everybody wants to play or be part of or understand or have happen when something bad goes down, right? And now
there are many instances of like vigilantism that is very popular in the world, right? I mean, you've got, like you said, the Punisher. You've got like the A-Team back in the 80s, if you know that. That was all about people who couldn't get their jobs done or couldn't get help from the cops, so they hired the A-Team.
I've always wanted to be Murdoch, but I never got the chance to walk around with a sock around my hand. But I always wanted to be Murdoch. He was always the funnest one.
There's a great article on Mises.org called "The A-Team Stands for Anarcho-capitalism," and it's a fun read. I'll post that in our show notes.
Very cool. Yeah, but I mean, superhero genre in general. I mean, you got Batman. You got I can't think of any others right now off the top of my head, but like Iron Fist and Power Man and Luke Cage. I mean, all kinds of superheroes are vigilantes.
Black Panther.
There you go. Tons and tons of them. I mean, they're just all over the place. Captain America, Iron Man. They're all vigilantes, all operating outside of the quote-unquote system, but they're always the hero of the story. So I think you're absolutely right, Michael.
Well, look at Billy Connolly, right? The guy who plays El Duce. We have two firms right now competing against each other back to Boondock Saints. In the movie, you have two firms competing against each other. You got the two brothers, the Boondock Saints, and you have the Italian mob in this particular area, right? And they're competing against each other. And what does the Italian mob do is they reach out to the maximum security prison and they let El Duce free. So they have one illegal firm says, you know what, we're gonna get rid of this other illegal firm, right? And they call in El Duce, another illegal guy, right? Again, outside of the state. I don't mean illegally as in necessarily bad. I mean illegally as in it wouldn't live up to our standard today. But in Kapistan, one firm calls another firm and gets the cleaner out. The cleaner comes in and tries to get rid of his own sons. He doesn't know that. And then they end up becoming their own firm at the end of the movie, right, and taking out the Italian guy instead. So it's interesting that we already have in the movie itself the mechanism in which one firm would take care of another firm, right?
Right, by going to the third firm, which was the whole thing that Ayn Rand missed, and which maintained her being a minarchist.
Right. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
big fan of Ayn Rand. And I would just like to bring up one more point. The only problem that I have with the insurance thing, and I admit that it is a solution. The only problem I have with the insurance thing is that what often is missed is the disassociation that that money is going to be able to bring back a wholeness to the situation, right? So, if I have a wife, which I do have a wife, and something happens to my wife and I have insurance out on my wife against, I don't know, whatever, robbery, murder or something. I do get a check for $10 million, right? So there is that insurance, but that's not going to bring back my wife, So a lot of times I hear ANCAPs and stuff bring up the insurance thing, and while I agree that it is a solution, it still misses the subjectivity. It misses the whole entire point that we just brought up before about how people have different subjective wants, and that if I have insurance out on somebody for whatever reason, including myself, it still doesn't necessarily make up for the loss of what I might value more, right? So,
yeah, that's a very good point, and I will concede that wholeheartedly. But I will say one thing: that the bar compared to what we have today is so incredibly low. The current justice system is not going to bring her back either, and it's not going to recompense you in any sense. So anything that's going to be a non-state monopolized solution is going to be an improvement, and that opens up a world of possibilities.
Not to mention the fact. Oh, go ahead.
I agree with you, absolutely.
To that, I would add that without all these government regulations and impositions and creations of things being illegal and not being illegal, that there would be so much more opportunity for people to employ their skills and their means to be productive than there is in existence today. So I think that the amount of criminality would in fact go down significantly. And so I think overall crime would reduce. And I'm sort of looking at my fortune teller like crystal ball here, but if you don't have somebody mandating that you can't work below a certain wage, you can't work in this field or that field, or you need to have this type of license or this type of regulation or this type of permit, just think of how much more productive people could be. And that reduces the incentive to do something that is violent or criminal to, achieve their ends, right? Only the real crazies would be the ones being violent.
I totally agree with you. But let's look back to look forward, right? So if we go back to the Wild Wild West, how many people actually had shootouts? And how many people actually stole, robbed trains?
Or stagecoaches, yeah.
Or stagecoaches, right? The book, the Not So Wild Wild West, a great book, by the way. I actually lent it out and I never got it back, so I actually don't have it. I usually have it on my shelf.
Theft. Go to your illustrator.
It's a fellow ANCAP, so I can't. I'm just going to get it back from him eventually. But great book. But when we actually look at the Wild Wild West, we find out that there was maybe I think it was around 3 or 4 shootouts, and they mostly were done to shoot somebody in the back. And when we look at train robberies, I think it's between 9 and 12. So, that's what we're talking about here when we talk about the Wild Wild West. We're not talking about a crime, infested, crazy, everyone's dying all the time type scenario that gets constantly pushed within our face in modern media. That doesn't happen. It's all a figment. So I think you're absolutely right that if without the government constantly being there, that it would happen less and less and less. I totally agree with you. And I also think that if you didn't have things like the Food and Drug Administration, you didn't have health departments. Like right now, all three of us grew up in a time period where we had health departments, and so it never crossed our mind what actually is going on in the kitchen. But if tomorrow we lived in Anarchy-capitalism, you're goddamn right that I would walk into a restaurant and I would say, "Can I please see your kitchen?" You know what I mean? It would be in my, until I got comfortable with that restaurant, I want to see what's going on back there, and I want to make sure there's no rats just hanging around next to the cheese, and I want to make sure that we're good to go. And I don't and any restaurant that was worth its salt would definitely bring you in the back and be proud to show you around.
Right, yeah, and I think the whole concept of licenses and certifications on that level, so long as they're voluntary, would play a role in, accrediting establishments, right? Like it would lend to their reputation and help them increase their sales and their bottom line.
Well, look at Yelp, Dan. Anytime that there's a problem, you go right on Yelp. Oh, yeah, my food was terrible. Yes, there was a rat in my salad, whatever it happens to be, and the majority of people are going to tell the truth. You're going to get, every once in a while, you're going to get a bad complaint or something like that, and every once in a while, you're going to have somebody go on there and lie. But if you have 600, 700, 800 people going on there to make a comment about a particular restaurant, and they got a 4.5 stars, you're pretty sure that, hey, at least 600 people, that's a lot of people that were very pleased with this restaurant. And that might be enough for some people, but I think that if a restaurant knew that they were very likely to have their customers say, let's walk back here, I got to tell you, if I owned a restaurant and I knew that 90% of my customers were going to see my kitchen would be unbelievable. Forget whatever standards exist on the books today. If I knew that my customers were going to see what was back there, I would, oh my God, you'd want to eat in the kitchen. You wouldn't want to eat out in the dining room.
Yeah, having these departments just it really does create this false sense of security, and it creates a lazy consumer thinking that these products are all been checked and they're all good and they're all healthy and they get the stamp of approval from this government entity that is terrible, but people trust it for some reason, who knows why, indoctrination and patriotism, I suppose. But yeah, these it would be much, much better, and there would be a market incentive to display those sorts of things that you guys are talking about, these kind of reputation things, or maybe like having glass in your kitchen. The diners can actually look in there and see it, and you might want to frequent that more often than another place, and that place would get popular and be very successful if they're open about their methods and their cleanliness.
Right, and then, anytime there is a failure in the health code, like food inspector types, E. coli outbreaks, or a restaurant does have rat parts in the salad, people are quick to blame capitalism, right, when it's clearly a failure of the current system that's in place. This health department mandated inspections and all that stuff. So it's kind of funny to see that when those little outbreaks do happen, and then you look down in the comments on those local stories, and everyone's basically taking the health department's word for it, like, oh yeah, this place is doing bad business, it's capitalism, it's terrible, but it's the health department that failed them, right? And it's the health department that told them they didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the problem, is when we have licensure, we believe that person somehow is, above some kind of standard that makes them, what's the word I'm looking for? Not untouchable, but
like beyond reproach, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what happened? So let's ask, all three of us, what happened in 2008 when all these people that were these financial consultants and everyone else that was licensed, they did their number 7 tests or whatever, their Series 7. They did all that fun stuff. They got all the licenses and everything else, and they were just going, balls to the wall, selling, ninja loans that had zero, people who were making like, $40,000 a year with 6 mortgages and all that fun stuff. Didn't the guys who sold them those mortgages didn't they all have licenses from the government that said that they were okay to do this and that they knew what they were doing? Didn't they all have that? Right. Clearly they did, and because they did, somebody just like the restaurant thought, hey, they must know what they're doing because the government licensed them to do it. I don't need to look into them, and I don't need to look at what they're actually doing. I can just trust that person. And instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to go back in that guy's kitchen, I'm going to find out what he's cooking up for me, which is what we would do in the restaurant in Anarcho-capitalism. You would do the same exact thing with this financial advisor. Instead of just taking his word for it, you'd say, I want you to show me exactly what you're talking about. I got to take responsibility for my own self. And I think that's part of, a clear part of what we're talking about here is the boys in Boondock Saints are taking responsibility for their own predicament. And they're not just saying, I'm going to go to the police. The police are going to take care of this. These guys are going to be the shining star that gets me rehabilitation. That's not what they're doing. They're saying, I'm going to be responsible. Not only am I going to be responsible, I'm going to be the one that goes out and creates this justice. And that's when they talk to their buddy Rocco, and Rocco says, I know where all these guys live. I know where all the bad guys are. I know where all their ins and outs are, where they hang out, all that stuff. And the boys say, all right, well, we're gonna take everybody out on your list first. This is, of course, after they decide that they're gonna try to become some kind of business. They go with Rocco, and that's when it all goes terribly wrong, right? They meet their father, and they never get a chance to actually. We never get the chance to see them take on Bitcoin and accept Bitcoin for vengeance, or gold money for vengeance, or anything like that. But it would be interesting. It would be interesting if they ever made a. Let's say hypothetically, if they ever made a second one of the movies, you know. Let's pretend like they're going to make a second one, you know. And they decided that they started off with gold money. They took gold money, and they would go out and be your vengeance for hire, you know. It might be interesting. It might be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, well, hey, thank you for bringing it back to the Boondock Saints, because I feel like this is one of those episodes where we veered away from the movie for a good majority of the time, but I think it was well worth it. And Michael, I just want to say I appreciate that you came on to do this episode with us, because you've thrown a lot of ideas out that make me think we want you back for The Godfather, we want you back for Blood Diamond, we want you back for talking about Taboo with Tom Hardy. Like, man, you might have just set up the calendar for the rest of the year.
Well, I'd be absolutely delighted to be back on the show. I really think that'd be cool. Thanks, guys.
Sure thing. Daniel, before we kind of wrap things up, I just wanted to wonder if you had any issues with any of the actions of the characters. You know, we usually like to evaluate the morality of the actions of the protagonists. And since there's so much violence in this movie, did anything ever strike you as too far or completely immoral? Or, I mean, were they killing like Russian mobsters who were just selling drugs to feed their family? Or what's going on in this movie for you?
Well, that's a good question, and that might make this show twice as long. There's sort of this implicit, these are all bad guys, and I feel like they sort of make that case to begin with, and then they also have the divine inspiration that sort of validates what they're doing. But yeah, I think there is an argument to be made that some of these things were a bit beyond, I think, what would be considered moral, especially when Rocco goes into that delicatessen and shoots those two guys. Because they were aware that he was sent into a situation where he thought that he was going to be killed. And we didn't really explain this whole situation, but it was the rope scene where the boys fell out of the ductwork above and killed these 9 mobsters. Rocco was dressed as a bellboy delivering some food, and he was going to kill this Russian dude, but he only had a 6-shot revolver and wasn't told that there were 9 guys there. So he was sent in to do this job to kill that guy with full knowledge by the people sending him that he was not going to be surviving this situation. Like, he would not be able to complete this mission. So he was sent on this suicide run, and then he went back to the delicatessen to confront the people who were aware of it, and he ended up shooting all of them. So I had a little bit of a moral issue with that. Even though they sent him in knowing he would die, but they weren't like a threat to him specifically at that moment, so it was a bit tough for me.
Well, did they, you say they sent him in. I mean, did they suggest that he go in? Did they order him in, or did they threaten him to go in? Or is this something he wanted to do? I mean, who's the moral actor in that situation?
Yeah, Rocco had been he'd been in this organization for about 18 years, and he was still, I think they called him a runner or an errand boy or a package boy. And, he's like near 40 and still doing this. So he was looking at it as his big break to go in and be a made man, like get made.
Okay. He's making his bones then?
Yeah, by shooting this boss, right, this Russian mobster boss. But they told him that there were only going to be like a couple of people there, but there ended up being 9 people. And apparently the Italian dudes who sent him in and he was excited to do it, right? We're aware.
But he was an immoral actor at that point, right?
Well, he was asked to go in and kill those guys, and he was willing to do it. Yes.
So he was acting immorally to go and murder 9 people, which even if he didn't know there were 9 people, he was excited to go murder some people.
Yeah, but they were bad dudes, so it also falls into the vigilantism, right?
So
it does. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it does fall into the vigilantism, but I think it comes down to so let's bring it back to kind of like modern, what happened recently, where you had a guy who might be on the alt-right Nazi deal. Is it okay just to walk up to him and punch him in the face, right? Is it okay just to walk over to these mobsters and kill them because they had done some bad stuff to people anywhere in the world at some point? I mean, all 3 of us have committed some kind of NAP violation in our life, whether it be minuscule or, I doubt that any one of us is like Dexter, but I think, one of us has to have at least bumped into somebody accidentally or.
Robert, he's on to us. He's on to us, man.
You guys it's true. I did. I tripped someone one time, so absolutely, you're right.
So yeah, right. I'm a serial bumper. I bump into people all the time, so constantly they can always, retaliate against me. But is it okay just to have some random person walk up and punch me in the face, or retaliate against me, or retaliate against these guys?
Past crime. Right.
So is it cool for the Italian guy Rocco to go kill these bad guys simply because they're bad guys? I mean, I think that there is some kind of moral problem, right?
I think so. Sure sounds like it. I mean, not having seen the movie, but from the way you described it, it sounds to me like there is.
Right, and then he goes back and kills his own guys.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right, that just because they... it's interesting. They knew he was going to die, but does that give you the right to shoot them because they knew you were going to die?
Are they obligated to provide, all the information that they know when they send somebody off on some sort of a job?
Is that a violation?
It's fraudulent to say that there's only 4 guys there when they know there are more.
Do they know that for a fact there would be?
Well, that's the other thing, too, is we don't know that, right? We don't really know that.
Yeah, I think the theory presented in the movie is one of the boys says to Rocco, hey, man, they knew that you were going in there with a 6-shot gun and there were going to be more guys there. So that was their working theory. And
but
then
that's not
when Rocco confronts them, they basically admit it.
Okay.
And then he shoots them for laughing at him about it.
Now, is it a violation of the NAP not to tell somebody that you know that they're going to walk into a trap?
I think so. I think it's fraudulent, and I think that they're using the situation as the weapon.
That's a good point. It's a good point. I agree. I agree with you. I'm trying to set it up. I'm trying to think about what are the other possibilities. I think it's wrong if somebody's going to walk into a trap and you did it. And I think they definitely were going to use the situation against him, and they were hoping that he wouldn't come out, right?
Now, what? I'm sorry. What is the motive for these people to want Rocco dead?
He's a screw up. They've been waiting to get rid of him for a long time.
Okay.
I don't know why they don't just whack him, right? Isn't that the Italian thing to do?
They should just whack him. Well, here's why you should just whack him. And this is a plot hole that exists this is a bad chess move. And I'm not saying that every single mobster is a genius, but this is a very bad chess move if you were talking about one mob to another, one firm to another firm in this world. The reason why is, why would you want to make waves? Let's say you did send this guy out there against 9 people and you gave him a 6-shooter revolver, which he uses completely incorrectly throughout the entire movie. So let's say he does go out there to utilize it, and not all the Russian guys, maybe they don't all die. So now they know that you sent the Italian mob sent this guy here to kill me. So now they started a mob war all because you wanted to get rid of a little pawn in your organization.
Yeah, that's terrible.
This is a stupid plan. I mean, this is a really bad allocation of resources. Simply get rid of this guy. If you think he's really that much of a screw up, there's other jobs this guy can do that he won't be screwing with your organization, or you just get rid of him. You don't send him on a mission where you know that he's not going to come back, and you know that he's very possibly his dead body is going to cause a gigantic war that you might not be able to win. They explain how bad the Russians are and how powerful they are, right in the beginning of the movie. Why would you want to start an international war over some putz that makes bad jokes?
Yeah, unless
I think there was
wanted
a war,
to.
I think there was a war already going on though, because the Russians had been moving in on the Italians' turf, right? Like that bar in the initial scene. The Russians bought the building and were kicking the guy out, and that was Italians' territory.
It's a good point, but my only other contention is that's a good point. But the problem is you still don't want to show the Russians how much of a screw up you are. So you still wouldn't send a shitty idiot who doesn't know how to fire a firearm at these guys to be the assassin, and then let's say now all the Russian guys die, right? Now you have the Russian guys look at the Italians and go, these guys can't even assassinate us. You just pissed them off, and you showed your incompetence. So so now if you show your incompetence that way, usually you're then betrayed by someone within your own organization, right? So there's different cells, if you want to call them cells, with factions within the family. So all the Russians got to do is go over to family number A, and family number B, and say, "Hey, the main family's screwed up. You sure you're on their side? You know what I mean?" So you never want to show your weakness that way. If you send in one assassin, you send in 10 assassins. And that guy Rocco and the Italians actually are very lucky that the McManus brothers fell through that ceiling and were able to be spot on John Wick awesomeness, and do their thing. Otherwise, Rocco would have shown the Italians to be completely inept idiots, kind of like they are kind of portrayed in the movie. They're not the most on the ball people in that movie. I don't want no Sicilian showing up to my house here. You know what I mean? I got my own firearms, but yeah. So that's my take on it. At least I don't know.
No, that's interesting. That's good. Interesting stuff. Yeah, and it seemed like the boys kind of lucked into all of their situations as far as being able to come out alive. Like he threw the toilet down on the one dude and then jumped on the other dude at the exact moment he was about to shoot his brother. Right? So that was like totally luck timing. And then they're fighting each other in this air duct and fall through. Totally unplanned. They happen to have the rope. They get their legs tangled in it. They're spinning around and they have the presence of mind to start shooting all 9 of these Russian guys. So they did have some sort of hand of God thing going on here.
Absolutely. No, there was a lot of awesome movie magic which made this film possible. That like they were talking about in the thing, you're like, oh, usually you jump behind the couch, you got to fire for 10 minutes, and they're usually doing their little thing. They're right. These guys thought it was going to be like the movies where, you have the Rambo knife when they go to the underground arms dealer and they get the Rambo knife and the crazy guns that they never, they're never going to fire, Their whole entire idea is built off of movies and cinema, and they just happen to have some kind of touched by an angel moment where they're able to pull off these amazing. I mean, if you ever, trained in firearms at all, either one of you guys, I know that I have, but I haven't done to the extent of the guy who's teaching Keanu Reeves how to shoot in John Wick or anything like that, or the guys in the Magpul movies and stuff like that. It's very hard to kill people headshot after headshot after headshot. Like we said earlier in the show, center mass is where you're supposed to be aiming for because you have a better chance of knocking off, hitting your target. These guys were amazing, just with their leg tangled up in a rope and just knocking people out left and right. It's incredibly the amount of training you have to do is And not only training you have to do once, training you have to do continuously to keep your skill set up. Unbelievable. These guys, these two meat packers that were packing meat in a thing, speaking Russian and French and Italian, all of a sudden can just fall upside down and knock out a whole entire trained killers, by the way, not just like they're just targets sitting around in a knitting circle. These guys are trained killers with their own firearms. They took everybody out. It was amazing.
Yeah, totally movie magic. Would never happen in real life, and they did borrow Diego Maradona's hand of God, right? Because he scored that goal off his hand. That was a big controversy.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, hey, guys, I think we really should start to wind this one down. We've been going almost an hour and a half, and it's been great. I almost don't want to stop talking about this, but I do have to get to bed before too long, and you're on the East Coast, so it's getting real late for you.
Yeah.
So any last kind of comments on the film, maybe a way to close out the film, maybe talk a little bit about the ending, and then tell our audience how to find you, and maybe mention something you're working on, and then we'll shut this one down.
Sure. So I think it all comes full circle at the end of the movie, just like all good movies do, where these three, the two brothers and their father, El Duce, Murphy McManus and Connor McManus, they all end up in a courtroom. So now they're in a courtroom, all three of these people, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's what they symbolize, right? The Trinity. And they're all sitting there, and they just took out the mob guy. And the entire courtroom is basically accepted them as the justice arm of their little enclave. They basically said that these guys are going to do the job that nobody else will. And we also see that the court system itself is actually complicit with this as well, right? The state has given up some kind of ability or whatever its perceived illegitimate power it already has. It gives it up to these three as some kind of hand of justice that it could not possibly live up to. So the court system itself, the bailiffs, even William Dafoe's character, Paul Smecker, he actually helps them out tremendously throughout the show and throughout the movie and throughout the end of it. So they're all complicit within these three guys who live outside of our given norms, and these guys are going to be our justice givers. So the whole movie is about vengeance, but I think it brings up, as we've discussed over the last hour and a half, a lot of interesting concepts about, and they're not all settled. I mean, I think a lot of these things are gray areas that we could talk about. You could probably take a whole episode about each one of these things and go and dive deeper. And I'm going to start listening big time and make sure that we hit them. I think it's going to be very interesting. For me, you can find me at evolutionofelconomics.com. I just put it back up there. It was a post, blog post. I'm putting a bunch of stuff up there. I'm working right now on one paper for Mises. Hopefully I can get in the Austrian Journal of Economics. That'd be my hope. It's based on Mises's work, so it deserves to be in that publication more than it deserves to be in anything else. And hopefully I'll be able to get to the Mises graduate seminar this summer. And hopefully you guys are okay with my dry sense of humor. We can be back on for some other kind of Italian day or something like that and do The Godfather.
That'd be great. We'd love it. Yeah, so just to give us a review of the movie, did you like it? Would you recommend it? Did you like the acting? I understand it was like the first time that the screenwriter had actually ever directed a movie, and then he also directed like the sequel that doesn't exist. Is that right? So is it a well-made movie?
I think for a first-run movie. By the way, I have a degree in acting too. So I have a degree in economics and finance and a degree in acting. So I'm qualified to speak on these matters. I think that it is. I think it's a good movie. I don't think that it's just just an action flick. I think it kind of tells a moral story of some sort. Those morals might not be the norm that we get in every other day Hollywood. The style itself is a little different than we normally get, but it's his first run. I think that his second run was terrible, That the Boondock Saints 2, I had a lot of problems with script. I had a lot of problems with a lot of things. It missed out on what the actual first movie had. Cinematography-wise, I thought it was a great movie. I thought the plot was good. Like I said, I think there's only a couple of holes left and right, but overall, if you compare that to what movies are today, I mean, this movie is Oscar-winning performance and Oscar-winning screenwriting compared to some of the movies that are in existence today that I can't even believe got any kind of money for funding. It's unbelievable. But no, I definitely recommend this movie all the time, especially people that are into some kind of action movie, or they're into some kind of period piece or place piece. Like if you're into Boston, you should watch this movie. You know, there's some really cool Boston moments. You know.
Just for note, this movie had a budget of $6 million, which it sounds like it all showed up on screen. It sounded like it looked better than a $6 million picture. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love when movies are only made for a certain amount of money like that, because, you know, when I was in the theater and we were doing plays, we would only get a budget of $10,000 to do a play, and that might seem like a lot of money, but if you've never produced something for a show for a long time, that money goes by so quick. It's not even funny. But it forces you to be creative. And what happens is when a movie like, let's say, the new Ghostbusters comes out, that just came out recently, has a ridiculous budget for CGI and stuff, you no longer have to be creative. You can just rely on money to get you by on certain things, which I have heard from reviews on the movie that they basically said, all right, we're just going to fill this in with some kind of computer ghost, and we're just going to do this and this stupid shtick, and they didn't actually think about having to be creative. Where movies that have very low budget, they have to figure out a way, and that's when a director is tested, a producer is tested, actors are tested, is when they actually have to be creative, which is what we're basically paying these people for, if you think about it, right? We're not paying them to do what we all could do at home. We're paying them to use that spark of imagination. So I like it when movies only have a certain budget, like back then $6 million is probably what? We're talking about what was this, 98? 99?
1999.
99.
Yeah.
So what was that then? What was that now? I'm trying to think.
We're probably close to 10, right?
Yeah, about 10. That's still low for a production of a movie, so
yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that stuff. Yeah.
To your point about Ghostbusters, that third act of that movie is just a big CGI fest. And if anybody's ever interested in listening to a director talk about creative choices to make a movie in a super tight budget, watch El Mariachi or Desperado and listen to Robert Rodriguez's commentary. Yeah. He basically gives you a free lesson in how to make a movie on a budget and all the interesting creative design choices and tricks that he used to stretch every dollar that he had. It's really, really interesting.
Desperado, great movie. Oh, man, I haven't seen that one in a while. That one's a great one.
Yeah, and he made it for a song, and he made the previous movie, El Mariachi, which is basically a remake of it for, I forget what it was, like just a few $1,000s.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, awesome.
Hey, speaking of a few $1,000s, do you realize that was the box office for the Boondock Saints?
Yeah, $30,471 was its take.
No way, really? Wow.
Well, there's a background on that. So all the extensive violence in this film, and of course it was all filmed and then ready to be released, but then the Columbine shooting happened, and so no one wanted to put the movie out in theaters, so it only showed in, I think, 5 theaters across the country for a weekend.
Wow, what a bad break.
Yeah.
But then it made about $50 million in domestic video sales and like Blockbuster rentals and all that sort of thing. So.
Right, but the funny thing is that the director, who he let this thing go to his head, there's a whole documentary about it called Overnight, which basically chronicles him making this movie, and he turns into a total asshole in the process. He did not, in his negotiations for making the movie, have any of the rights to any of the VHS or DVD sales. So he only got a cut of the $30,000 up front.
Oh.
Oh, man. That's how important contracts are.
That's right. He ended up suing and getting an undisclosed sum because, they did make the $50 million because it became a cult classic, right? I mean, that's our bread and butter for this show is either a present day movie like we just did the Logan movie with the Afro-Libertarian, and that one was great. But since Robert and I, we both live in areas that don't really lend themselves to letting us see present-run, theater-run movies, cult classics are what we tend to focus on.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is, too, you cannot be blamed for spoilers. People can blame you for spoiling Logan for them, but they can't. If you haven't seen The Godfather or you haven't seen Boondock Saints by now, then you got problems.
Yeah, that's on you.
All right.
Yeah, and we threw up spoilers all over the Logan one, so that's okay. Well, hey, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, you're welcome back anytime. Any of those movies I listed or, the one you just mentioned, what was it?
Taboo.
Yeah, and there was even another one you mentioned. But anyway, you're welcome back anytime. I mean, for sure.
I appreciate it.
So we do appreciate you coming on, and we do appreciate you listeners for joining us. This was, I think, our 12th episode as the Actual Anarchy podcast, brought to you by the fine folks at actualanarchy.com and readrothbard.com. You can find more of Michael's work on our site and on his site, theevolutionofeconomics.com. If you do visit our site, do click on the Amazon links or the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom links or any of the other fun links that'll give us a tiny little commission that gives us a little bit more incentive to keep going at this thing. And that's pretty much all I got to say other than happy St. Patrick's Day, people. Thank you so much for coming out and celebrating this with us with this Boondock Saints movie. So, Robert, why don't you say some pieces, and then we'll peace out.
Yeah, thanks for listening, all my beautiful freedom nerds. Like us, subscribe, review us. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, Actual Anarchy. We're at Trubster at Twitter, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere you can find us. Give us a mention on Facebook. It all helps out. And what are we doing next, Daniel? We got a next episode coming up on Sunday. This is our St. Patrick's Day special. Is this getting released on Sunday?
No, this will drop Friday. So we're going to have another one Sunday, which we haven't recorded yet. It might be Ghostbusters, but it might be something else. Maybe Sharknado. I don't know. Who knows?
Okay, it's a mystery. So look forward to that, everybody. Thanks for listening. The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.